Picture of a man described as 5 feet 11 inches tall, 175 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes, age 36. That was my precise description. He was me, I was him. He was never found. On the first anniversary of the attack, September of 2002, the city held its first memorial at Ground Zero. And the national media anchored on the 10th floor outdoor patio of the Merrill Lynch building, so we were on the west side of Ground Zero. The city wasn't sure how many people would show up that day. It was only for family members. It made plans for 7,000. At 8:30 a.m., 24,000 people were in line above the 16-acre site, and it was a beautiful day. Blue skies, 70 degrees, a stunning September morning, just like the year before. At 8:40 a.m., Governor Pataki and Mayor Giuliani begin to read the first of 2,753 names. Gordon Amoth Jr., A-A-M-O-T-H, is the first name that is read each and every year. At that very moment, a fierce and determined wind started blowing from the east. That wind was so strong and so sudden it was knocking over TV cameras and big, heavy HMI lamps. Tents that were set up on the patio to shield people from the sun, they were skipping down that terrace like a dry maple leaf. And all day, the winds never stopped. The Deutsche Bank, which once stood at the south end of Ground Zero, had this enormous American flag. It was hanging for 11 months. And that flag that day was ripped in half. And those conditions were the same in New York City, at the Pentagon, and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. I remember hearing that Native Americans believe the souls of the departed speak to them through the winds, like a spirit in the sky. The very next morning, I jump a cab after work, and there's this rather beautiful, peaceful music in the taxi. And I say, "Excuse me, is this from South America?" No answer. Cabbie must be in a bad mood. No problem. 15 minutes later, I'm about to get out of the cab, and I say, "Sir, is this music from South America?" He says, "No, it's from North America." And then he explains that he's from a tribe in Connecticut. I said, "Sir, do you believe the souls of the departed speak to you through the wind?" And he shuts the music off and he puts his arm over the seat. He says, "I hear this story every day since I'm 3 years old, and I never believed it until what I saw yesterday." And what do you think now? He said, "I think they're all coming back." And that moment catapulted our country into a different world. Afghanistan, Iraq, the war on terror, ISIS, Paris in November, Brussels just a month ago, and tomorrow, where and who? Those stories are still being written, and so is that history. But I like that story because it keeps people connected. And I like being back home, staying connected to the people I know. It's good to see many things have not changed here. It's either Skyline or Gold Star, right? It's either UC or Xavier, right? Wrong crowd. City Council is still holding you hostage 29 years later. How's that trolley working out? Just saying. Our family is first generation Cincinnati, and we've been here for more than 50 years. My parents were married in a beautiful church in Evansville, Indiana, and the next day they hopped in their brand new 1961 Ford Falcon and drove to Cincinnati because Mom had a teaching job in Milford. Cincinnati's been in our blood ever since. And my grandparents soon followed. They spent their final years at one of the finest nursing facilities ever made, Bailey Place, since renamed Bailey, across from the College of Mount St. Joseph on the west side above the river. My grandmother, Dee Dee, had a nervous condition that crippled her for the final 10 years of her life. My grandfather, George Nittle, K-N-I-T-T-L-E, he was a model of health, never sick a day in his life. He moved on to the 3rd floor eventually, independent living, and he would not have it any other way. Dee Dee lived on the 1st floor, and sometimes she needed all the help she could get. When my grandfather came down with shingles at the age of 97, he was moved to the 1st floor for the first time for better treatment. And for the very first time in more than 10 years. Separated by just a few bedrooms, my grandparents slept as close to one another as they had in a decade. And that night, my grandmother died. Somehow they know if you're not well enough to care for me, there's not much of a reason to be here. When my grandfather recovered, he gave us 3 more good years, and the last time I saw him, we were sitting alone at Bailey. He says, "Billy, you get along now. If you've got something to do, get it done. Don't let it pile up." He left us a few days later at the age of 100. And on May 23rd at the Western Hills Country Club, we will hold the 13th annual George Niddle Bailey Golf Tournament named in his honor, George Niddle. The K is silent, but the man was not. It's a fundraiser. We raise awareness and a little bit of money to help seniors who cannot pay their own bills. And that's what people from this community do. I find inspiration in them. How do you find your inspiration? Sometimes it takes someone or something or some event to move us. It's like that old battleship at sea, heavy fog, nighttime. Captain sees another light ahead. He sends a message, change course immediately. And the message comes back, you change course. And the captain says, I'm a battleship, you must change course immediately. And the response in return, but I'm a lighthouse. These events or moments or people find a way to move us sometimes when we need it most. Be prepared at whatever age to change your course. In my business, we're changing course all the time. And if you have genuine curiosity, nothing gets old. Every day is interesting. The sole reason for the success of the Fox News Channel comes from our leader and founder, Roger Ailes. Warren, Ohio, Trumbull County, north of Youngstown, right near the Pennsylvania border. It was his vision. People believe Fox News is popular because it speaks to a certain group of Americans. I think it works because Ailes challenges his employees to think differently, to find stories that other news outlets are not reporting. It's what makes us different. I also know the number of people in our news division pale in comparison to other operations. We do a lot more with a lot less. I used to work on a show that had 60 employees. I came to Fox and we had 12, and that was culture shock. Remember this when you are debating success. That manpower does not equate to productivity. I have seen both, and they are very different from each other. Some of Roger's best lines are ones he repeats all the time. Negative people make positive people sick. Just give the facts. People are smart enough to make up their own minds. And never follow the crowd because it's too damn easy. One person who does not follow the crowd is Donald Trump. On August 6th of last year, the debate season began, as Kay mentioned, for the current campaign season. It was our debate, Fox News. We flew dozens of staffers to Cleveland inside the Quicken Loans Arena. So when America was enjoying the final month of summer, 16 men and 1 woman had gathered for the first debate of this election cycle. Now, no network had ever hosted 2 debates within 4 hours of each other. Never been done before. Martha and I, my co-anchor, were the moderators for debate number 1 that day, the very first of this season. We were anxious, and for good reason, and the candidates were anxious for a good reason. I say anxious and not nervous because I think nerves are negative, but anxiety can be channeled positive energy. See, no one was quite sure how this was going to go. Keep in mind, you got a lot of moving parts. You got a live audience, you got security, you got a sports arena, you've got Donald Trump. So starting at 11 a.m., all 17 candidates are given a schedule. They're allowed 15 minutes to come inside the arena, see where the podium is, see where the microphone is, where the lights are, where the moderators sit, where the audience is. You get an idea for the sense of the environment. 16 took advantage of this opportunity. 1 did not. I will give you 1 guess who that person was. Now, I think it's smart to see the field. I want to know, where's the bench? Where's the scoreboard? Show me this, that, and the other. For most of that afternoon, I thought to myself, boy, this is reckless. leading in all the polls. All the attention of the country is focused on him. Why would he not take advantage of that opportunity? There's too much on the line. After all, he's the former producer of The Apprentice, right? He understands the importance of seeing the field. I tell you this anecdote to display the confidence of Trump, whether you're a supporter or not. You see, on the side of the stage, there's a line of tape on the floor. Each candidate has their name on the ground. They line up single file. They walk into the arena, and Trump, dare I say, owned the room. Sight unseen. He was entirely comfortable. And that night, we had 24 million Americans watch. It was the highest rated news program in the history of cable TV. Now, I'm not good at predicting the future. There might be a contested election in Cleveland come mid-July. There might not. It has been 40 years since that happened. But I remind you, 1976 was 4 years before cable television was born. It was a lifetime before Donald Trump sent his first tweet. I don't know what happens in the modern era. Show of hands here. Who thinks they've often heard this is the most exciting or craziest or bizarre election of your lifetime? Right? Right? I'd agree with that. Next time you hear that, go to Google. Because the truth is, most elections have curveballs. We just think of the here and now. 8 years ago, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, they fought into June before she was forced to concede. I remember working that campaign late on a Saturday night. We were waiting results from Wyoming or Kansas or Nebraska. We all looked at each other and said, what are we doing here? It was Saturday night, it was 1 o'clock in the morning, and no one had a good answer. So we said goodbye and we signed off and went home. 8 years before that, Jody Fleissig, a colleague of mine who works in public relations in Atlanta, we first met at CNN. And on the night of the election in 2000, she was a producer, I was the anchor, and my job was to replace the legendary Bernie Shaw at midnight. And I was kind of jacked up about this because we had the balance of power in Congress to be decided, and all the West Coast states were going to give us the answer. Little did we know that our team never went on the air because Bernie never got off the air, and America was too close to call. At 9 a.m. the next day, Jody comes up to the anchor desk in Atlanta. During the first commercial break, she pops her head around the corner and says, Hammer, can you go to Tallahassee this afternoon? I said, Jody, this story is over by 5 o'clock this afternoon. So I said yes, and I packed for 2 days. And I came home 37 days later. I was the one who never left. First one in, last one out. The point is, next time someone tells you this year is the most unusual election, make them think twice. 8 years after Bush versus Gore, we were in Denver, Colorado for the Democratic Convention, and I met David Plouffe. David Plouffe is a slightly built man who is now an executive at Uber. But before that, he ran Barack Obama's campaign. He was the numbers guy. He knew where the districts were, he knew where the votes were. The convention runs for 4 nights, and they're directed towards sharing a message in prime time with voters at home. The first 3 nights are rather standard, speeches, a small surprise here or there, but the climax was on the 4th and final night when then Senator Obama would accept the nomination for his party. And that year, it was far from conventional. The DNC was using an 18,000-seat Pepsi Arena, but that 4th and final night, everyone was moving to the 70,000-seat Invesco Field. Outdoors, home of the Denver Broncos. This had never been done before. The setting was planned to have these giant Roman-like columns on stage, and Senator Obama would walk between them, and 70,000 people would go nuts. He was going to be the political rock star. All that happened. And now I'm going to tell you why. That week, the headline screamed, Obama set for coronation, rally to crown a president. His detractors had a pretty good time poking fun at the stage and the setting and the idea. But earlier that afternoon, you see, the campaigns make the rounds of each of the television networks. They come to Fox and CNN and ABC and NBC and CBS, and they'll give us a forecast for what message they hope to deliver that evening. That afternoon, David Plouffe Mr. Uber in his next life, was the one making the rounds, and he had never done that before. And he walked into our room and he said, "You can write whatever you want. It does not matter. The only thing that matters is this. We're getting 70,000 people in that stadium. We're getting 70,000 email addresses. We're getting 70,000 cell phone numbers. And we're going to work through those people to find 3 or 4 or 5 like-minded others who live in Colorado. And we are going to win this state. That's our mission. Write what you want." And that's a mission they accomplished. The reason I tell you that story is because that was only 8 years ago, and the methods have evolved through technology dramatically. Ted Cruz is a big fan of data analytics. That's the fancy way of describing how they examine what you do online. Data analytics basically work this way. You're living in Ohio, you do a search online for the Second Amendment, and you could be the recipient for an online pop-up ad between now and Election Day. And maybe you saw one of these during the primary last month. That's amazing power. You think about how far we've come. I would argue they don't need your cell phone or your email address anymore. They've got your Google search history. We did a debate in Greenville, South Carolina several years ago. We partnered with Google. And Google came into the meeting and they said, "We know where the flu breaks out in America before the government does." I said, "Whoa, that is some amazing power." The building where I live in New York has a doorman. As you know, a doorman sits downstairs and he feels the packages and the laundry and makes sure no one gets past him who should not live there or be there. Our main doorman is a Puerto Rican by the name of Dick Jesus Marvin Rodriguez. We call him Marvin for short. And he loves when I walk through the door. Marvin's about 35 years old. I've lived in the building 10 years, so I've seen Marvin grow up. He wanted to be a Marine, but he settled for something else. He's a father, and he loves his kids. And he's also a big Fox News fan. So Marvin's obsessed with the election. So he sees me as a prime target every time I come walking through the door. "Hey, Bill, did you see that crazy story about blah, blah, blah? That's crazy stuff, Bill." And then Marvin goes on and on about this or that or the other until the elevator door closes. And each time I say, "Marvin, where'd you see that?" "Oh, it's on the news." I said, "What news, Marvin?" He said, "It's all over Facebook." Every single time. I want to introduce Marvin to Mugi back in Uganda because I am sure they would be Facebook friends. Digital technology is terrific, but I wonder about depth of knowledge. If everything is spit out in 140 characters or less, once you check your Instagram feed or get caught up on the news by way of Snapchat, how much have you learned? And this is critical. I still print stories in actual paper, and that's the way I've learned, and it's not a habit I can likely break. When I speak to students, my advice might sound a bit old school. I recommend they read the A section of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, front to cover, at least a couple times a week. See, we have all this information in our pocket, but how will we consume it? What is our depth of knowledge? One of the last places in New York City where you can't get a signal is the subway. And for security, that's changing quickly. Every day I'll print half a dozen articles that I want to read later, and I'll save those for the subway ride home. Another thing I'll tell students, listen for advice from people you respect. I applied for a semester in Luxembourg while I was at Miami. Fantastic deal. You go overseas, you live with a family, you're central to Europe, so travel is super convenient. I really wanted to do it. So I applied, and the director of the program, a rather distinguished British woman by the name of Dr. Annette Markin, sent me a note to come talk to her. It was not what I was expecting. You see, students have to submit essays, and she wanted to talk about mine. She was not impressed at all, but she knew I was dying to go. And it wasn't about subject matter, it was about grammar. And man, did she let me have it. But after she pointed out the numerous mistakes, well, I paid attention and I stopped making them. Lesson learned. But part of what makes us all successful is recognizing what we do well and what is better left to others. I think I can spin a lot of plates at one time. I take this ADD mind of mine, I focus and I get calm when everything around me seems to be falling apart. When the pressure gets higher, I get calmer. This helps a lot in breaking news in a newsroom. It helps a lot when you fly into Paris after 2 overnights after hundreds have been killed or wounded. You too have traits that few people can teach you. So recognize them and embrace them. In fact, all my colleagues are pretty good at putting out fires, and quickly. Now, if you listen to the surveys and the polls that are done on journalists and who Americans trust, they don't give the media high marks. But think about where the world would be without reporters asking questions, without taking pictures and telling everyone about it. What would happen if the media is no longer given access? Consider what would happen if we were not there. There are a few clear examples today. Christians in the Middle East targeted for elimination. ISIS has planted its flag in Syria and Iraq and Libya. There are very few reporters, if any, to cover it. The networks will not put their people in these situations because it's too dangerous. It is life and death. Think about this. The mass killings in Bosnia and Srebrenica in the mid-90s, the Rwandan massacre around the same time. All this happened in part because no one was there to tell the world. Now, we might be guilty of a lot of things. You might want to throw a lot of things at your TV screen. But a free press getting access is essential to a society that cares to function. Far from perfect, but perfectly essential. In closing, a few things I think I know. Don't break your own rules, ever. The only normal people are the people you don't know. Think about that. And when you start blaming the dry cleaners for shrinking your shirts, it's time for you to exercise. I also believe the only truly bipartisan thing in America is the good life. Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, it does not matter. Once they have it, they will never let go of it. And for that reason, you should always demand more of your leaders in Washington or Columbus or here in Cincinnati. Also, time does not wait for a cautious man. So get busy and don't let it pile up. And surround yourself with positive people. People that are not negative. Because the negative ones will take more energy than they deserve from a good person like yourself. In the end, life is pretty obvious. Make good decisions. And stay a little paranoid. It might just take you further than you think. You've been a great audience today. Thank you very much for having me.